Hey folks, from Game Makers, I'm Joe Kim. Beyond Games is a San Francisco-based mobile game development studio that has recently launched Battle Strike Force, a 4X strategy game featuring Sylvester Stallone. I had an opportunity to speak with the Beyond management team, including CEO Aron Beierschmitt, about a few interesting aspects of their business. First of all, Beyond has gone through a series of pivots, a merger, and a restructure, and has done a really impressive job of facing challenging times to be able to survive and finally launch Battle Strike Force. Secondly, the team has gone from being a San Francisco-focused development team to being multi-location and working as a distributed team. And finally, even as a small studio, Beyond has been able to get a big IP, Sylvester Stallone, into their Battle Strike Force game and to integrate him very deeply through a fairly innovative deal structure with Sylvester Stallone. And so to find out how they did it and about much, much more, stay tuned as we take it over to Beyond Games right now. Everybody, I'm here with Aron Beierschmitt, the CEO of Beyond Games, and Aron, I thought it'd be great to first talk about kind of Beyond Games and this exciting new game that you guys are launching, Battle Strike Force with Sylvester Stallone. And so maybe could you talk to me a little bit about Beyond and kind of what this game is about?
Yeah, absolutely. We kind of started with the thesis of, I guess initially we looked at 4X strategy. That genre, obviously very core, very narrow audience, very deep, complicated games. And we played a lot of MZ's titles, Fun Plus games, and we said, okay, these are interesting. There's obviously a lot of depth here. There's what is the hook? What is keeping people in these for years, and obviously engaging and retaining and monetizing them over time. And ultimately, our thesis was, well, it's the social network. It's the players in a guild competing together against the challenges in the world, whether that's other guilds or just challenges put in place by the game makers themselves. And so we looked at this genre that in some ways has seen some innovation, but we felt there was an opportunity to broaden the audience that would enjoy this experience. And so the ultimate kind of thesis for us as a company was, can we take a mid-core player and incrementally onboard them into the kind of deep 4X strategy gameplay that is kind of present in the genre today. And so Battle Strike Force is kind of our first attempt at doing that. And we kind of looked at baseline 4X strategy of base building and tactics and said, well, okay, what's the first step to broadening this? And the first big step was, well, let's go with a real deep hero collection meta. Galaxy of Heroes style, Heroes Charge, right? Summoner's War. That gives a mid-core player something to kind of resonate with and collect and invest in. And so we did that. The next thing was, we don't want to be a March battler. We want an actual battle loop for players to engage in. So we have an active 3D battle loop where you bring 2 heroes and 3 minions into a attack sequence against a defensive set of heroes and troops. And it's a real fantastic opportunity for players to strategize in how they build out their deck versus their attack deck versus a defensive deck. And then ultimately they get to see the results of their strategy play out in real time over a very quick, short battle loop. Of course, we enable people to auto battle and things like that. But the idea was, okay, 4X strategy, you got a hero collection loop, you have a real battle that's visible to players, and something that hopefully is more appealing to a mid-core user than a March battle report. And kind of the cherry on top, outside of a lot of other optimizations around how we spawn people on the map and via zones on the map, more incrementally ramp them into the deeper kind of 4X strategy gameplay, was Sylvester Stallone. And bringing him deeply, we wanted from the beginning, and one of the reasons we were able to actually sell him on working with us was this idea that he wouldn't just be on the app icon and the splash screen in the tutorial. The idea was, let's deeply integrate him as a fictional character in our world. So he's Jasper Reese, the leader of the resistance against the Iron Order, and he is a kind of frequent, reoccurring mentor character to the players throughout the experience. So we have a very deep PvE campaign content.
Right.
That shows Jasper Reese and our hero characters actually interacting in dialogue sequences and things of that nature. So that was a long-winded answer.
Sure, yeah, and that's great. I mean, how did you first kind of land on this kind of 4X March battle genre? Like, what made you guys think this is the area that we want to go after rather than, several other directions you could have gone?
I think, quite frankly, we looked, obviously the hyper-casual trend has kind of been insane over the last few years, and we thought, we don't really want to compete there. What's happening in casual? Don't really want to compete there. It's the depth of the experience in 4X strategy and the engagement that occurs around this very deep social experience that excited us. We always say we're really building a social network with a game loop at its core, and seeing players come into Fun Plus and MZ experiences and stick around for years because they enjoy playing through this experience with their guildmates is really what ultimately resonated with us. I don't think in any other genre you have that depth of social engagement, and that's where we wanted to kind of focus, and where we think ultimately players are going to we think that'll be the ultimate draw for a mid-core player is, I can actually interact with other people and enjoy this experience together.
And then in terms of Beyond as a company, and in terms of like the team required to support this kind of game, could you talk about the company itself, like, the size of the company, the types of employees you have currently?
Sure. We just crossed 50 total employees. We're a distributed team. We have a small HQ here in SF. It's about 13 people. Johannesburg, South Africa is our art and animation studio, technical art as well, and then El Salvador is our engineering team. And those are wholly owned subsidiaries. We've been working with them really since the beginning of the company.
Okay. And then you mentioned Sylvester Stallone, and I think working with IP is there's benefits and there's kind of disadvantages. And so for you, maybe we could start by asking, how did you land on Sylvester Stallone versus some other celebrity or well-known person, and then what's that experience been like integrating an IP into your game?
Absolutely. We landed on Stallone, quite frankly, just looking at the core demo here, 35 to 55 males. There's a huge overlap with people who've grown up with him as Rocky and Rambo.
Sure.
And the Expendables franchise. I also just think, there were other stars we could have potentially tried to get, but you have to look at the new Creed movies coming out, him playing in Guardians of the Galaxy and kind of that cameo. He's still very, very relevant. We also saw the success of Mobile Strike with Schwarzenegger. There's clearly an overlap there, and our experience. And the game that we wanted to build, this kind of G.I. Joe meets X-Men kind of style title, fit really well with him and his character that he knows how to play.
Got it. And then when you think about integrating, a celebrity into a game from a economic perspective, like what kind of analysis do you do, or how do you think about the economics to understand whether it makes sense to bring, a celebrity into a game or not?
We kind of looked at and ran creative tests with Stallone versus non-Stallone, and it was clearly a fit based on just the CPI reduction, right? And we've run dozens of tests since then that included other heroes and wouldn't include Stallone, and it's a significant cost reduction in our CPIs.
Got it. And then were there challenges in terms of working with a celebrity and kind of doing that IP integration into the game, and what would some of those challenges be? He is,
yes, it's been tough. It's been tough. Not necessarily even Stallone working through his agency initially, WME. That's obviously this, massive corporation, and having to deal with his agents and frankly having to deal with a lot of people who don't understand mobile gaming, don't understand how long it's going to take. We certainly took a lot longer than expected to build and release this game with kind of a small team that we have on it. And so there was a lot of legwork to help him understand that this is not a movie. This is not something where you're going to film it and then you're going to do the whole press junket and then it's going to run in theaters for a month or so and then you're done. And so we definitely had to deal with this idea of, on the other side of this, and it may take 2 years, is a game that can generate 100 million plus in ARR. And it was kind of shifting his frame of mind, which, to his credit, Stallone's an entrepreneur, has made a lot of investments himself, produced a lot of his own movies, and so I think that story resonated with him, and ultimately we got him to take an equity bet on the company in addition to revenue and download bonuses. But he really did take kind of an entrepreneurial bet on us as a team and what we were trying to build.
Okay.
And quite frankly, in the early days, just being fully 3D and having this battle scene, and you compare it to a mobile strike,
right.
it resonated. It resonated. Okay. The last thing I'll say, this is just kind of funny, we played very much off him and Schwarzenegger's just interpersonal rivalry, right? Because they're obviously really, really good friends, right. But competitive. Right. And so he kind of knew from Schwarzenegger what MZ had paid. And he kind of came to us and said, can you make me more? And we're like, yeah, I think so. I think we can, especially if you take a long-term bet.
Right.
And so it worked out well. It definitely worked out well. It kind of culminated earlier this year with us filming a live action commercial with him that we've started to deploy in creative, and it was just a fantastic experience. You know, he knows how to play the character of Jasper Reese. It's his Expendables character. You know, it's to a certain extent it's Rambo, a little toned down kind of version of Rambo. But it was incredible to see him in his element and working on it. It's something we're excited to continue. I mean, he's got a consistent cadence of posts to his Instagram and things. And
oh, nice.
It's a pretty good relationship.
One of the most interesting things for me in talking to a lot of development studios is just finding out more about the origin story. Mm-hmm. So could you tell me about, what's the story behind Beyond Games? How did it start? You know, who were the initial founders? How did the whole, how did everything begin? Yeah,
it's a crazy story. It's one that I've... It's gotten easier to tell the more times I've had to tell it.
Okay.
Beyond Games was originally founded in 2013 by Nick Barjois and a couple of ex-Natural Motion engineers.
Okay.
And they raised very quickly off the back of... Nick was a phenomenal pitcher and had a vision of innovating on top of what Machine Zone had built, and it resonated with investors. So they raised a lot of capital very quickly in a series, a seed and an A, and built a large team. And then after that, and I've been an entrepreneur for a decade. I've failed multiple companies before. So I look at a lot of what Nick did as simply just first-time entrepreneurial mistakes. He scaled up a team too quickly. They were attempting to do too much. They were trying to build a game engine from scratch. They were building their own analytics stack. They were doing a lot of these things that you should normally outsource on your first game and as a startup. And so in mid-2016, myself and most of our executive team today came into Beyond Games by way of a merger of Americana Game Studio, which a really long-time friend of mine, Brett Saylor, ran. And ultimately that began about a year and a half of transition where we did have to go through some layoffs and some really hard times to kind of right the ship and create a new, or basically put in place a new creative direction for the title and the team. And the reality is Beyond Games today is one person that the original founder hired, still around. He's our art director, Bo. He's phenomenal. And the team that we've built since then. So it's been very much this wild ride, certainly a roller coaster. But something that we're real proud to have kind of made it out the other side, shipped the game, and really produced something that seems to have a lot of value out of something that was definitely a rough hand.
So it sounds like you and a lot of the current executive management team came in through Americana, through that merger.
Correct.
But can you talk me through that initial point of actually merging? What was like the motivation behind merging, and then maybe talk through some of the challenges or issues that came through from merging?
Sure. Brett Saylor, who was the CEO of Americana and had been an angel investor in Nick, actually, and in Beyond Games. So he'd written a very small check, hadn't heard from Nick in a while. It's mid-2016. Americana had taken a different approach than Beyond Games. Instead of raising a lot of capital, they were bootstrapped, and they'd been working with Amazon Game Studios to produce a title, kind of a second-party, third-party relationship. And they ended up... when the new studio head was hired, he cut all game projects from the predecessor.
Got it.
And Americana was one of those studios. So Brett was kind of faced with, do I now go fundraise for this thing, or do I find a home?
Right.
And as these things kind of work out, Nick reached out around the same time, was very open about some of the issues and challenges that he was running into. And quite frankly, a lot of where the Beyond Games team was weak, Americana was strong. Right. Very, very deep engineering talent, particularly on distributed systems and building scalable systems to support the type of game and vision that Nick and the original Beyond Games team had.
Right.
And so it made a lot of sense to come in and kind of combine forces. as I kind of alluded to, it was a difficult transition. It was a very hard, probably year after that, of trying to get these two teams to work together and interface together, and we navigated a complete design pivot of the game from what was going to be a very realistic World of Tanks almost style 4X strategy game that had some kind of odd mismatched Clash of Clans components in it, and like I said, completely it's tough. Everybody feels it's their baby on both sides of the fence, and you had a lot of personalities running around for a while. So that was something that was very, very difficult, but we learned a lot through that transition and having to navigate the product pivot.
Were the two teams, did they have similar cultures, or were the cultures different? And then if they were different, how did you kind of merge the cultures? Or
the BG team, as you can imagine, was a team that had raised a lot of money real early. So they were kind of used to a lot of perks and things that the Americana team being bootstrapped and for a while Americana had been working out of Brett's apartment. That was kind of where they were at least the team that was here in SF, right? Johannesburg had their own studio. And so there was this transition of, the expectation and the bar was raised when the Americana team came in, and I think there were a lot of people who were more into just your almost cliche Silicon Valley style of like, I'm going to come in, there's a lot of perks, I enjoy kind of working here, but there's not a lot of pressure to deliver. And that's probably the thing that I'm most proud of when I kind of came in and took over as GM is collectively, myself and the team, we were able to navigate that product pivot. And within a year of me joining, shipped the first title, which we kind of was a kind of throwaway SKU we called Dawn of Tanks, just to test the new battle loop and the product pivot. But that was the first product that Beyond Games had shipped in 4.5 years. And that was the result of a hard effort on the front of the Americana team and members of the original BG that stuck around, particularly in our El Sal studio and art director Bo, to get that done.
Great. And then probably the last question I have for you is, it sounds like you have a little bit of a distributed team and you have your headquarters in San Francisco. Can you talk about that decision in terms of headquartering in San Francisco and then, why, I guess, Johannesburg versus the other locations you have set up?
Yeah, it's certainly a product of how everything came together with Americana and BG. Americana had the Johannesburg studio. That's a team that Brett had been working with for a decade. So we had a very deep relationship with the studio leadership there, and so that enabled us to kind of pull them in. And then Beyond Games had found a really talented core team in El Salvador to build around. So we kind of inherited this inherited this kind of mismatch of or just this global team. And it's funny, my first company had a studio in Sydney and a studio in the Philippines and just a few US employees. So I'm very used to this idea of working with a global team. I think if you're trying to deliver a 24/7, 365 experience to players globally, you need to be distributed to kind of survive that. A big part of what I've looked to hire, in particular here in SF, has been people who are experienced working with teams. It's ex-wargaming, ex-GRE and DNA folks who are used to interfacing with international teams and having to work across time zones. And I think, in particular, John, who you talked to in a second, has done a really, really good job of making the process by which we iterate in development a lot more efficient despite the time zone barriers. Because the reality is we have a few of our Johannesburg studio that stay a little late, get on a sync call with us daily, but the reality is by the time the SF team is here, they've already worked their day. So you have to get in this cadence of iterate or provide feedback over the course of our day. They work on a new iteration, right? And then we wake up in the morning and do it again.
And actually, I do have two more questions. Sorry.
No,
so one other question I have is you talked about what sounded like some pretty tough challenges in terms of like the merger, but just going back over your history throughout, Americana and now merged with Beyond, what would you say were like the toughest challenges that you faced over that time? Was it the merger? Were there other things that kind of popped up and like just trying to understand what the toughest things that came up were for you?
The merger transition is probably the real tough point because there was a finite amount of time to use the cash that was left in Beyond Games Bank, frankly, when we became a part of Beyond Games, to once again pivot the product and basically pitch this new team, this new direction to investors who hadn't seen anything in 4 years.
Right.
So the transition shortly followed by really what has been this kind of perpetual state of undercapitalization where
right.
we've gotten a lot of support. I mean, I have to thank the team at Acme who's stuck with us throughout all of this. But it's been difficult to constantly, we've always been under the gun, I guess is the best way of putting it, right?
Okay.
Where we have to show KPI improvement with each release. And it's been a consistent thing. I've been here almost 3 years, and every 6 or so months we have to go through this. Like, here's where we're at, here's what we have achieved.
Right.
And in some ways it's pushed us forward.
Right.
You know, we're certainly hoping with worldwide launch, with how KPIs are currently looking and some of the excitement that we have around this moment, to raise enough capital to finally give this team, this extremely talented team, the
right.
breathing room that they need to continue to kind of grow and scale the game
Yeah.
without the perpetual pressure of delivering every single quarter. I mean, the reality is that is going to be the case as we, you know, continue to grow and expand our live ops operation, right? But it will be a bit of a different mentality if we can raise the war chest we're currently seeking.
Got it. And then my real final question for you
Okay.
is, what was the biggest lesson that you've learned in this whole experience with, you know, Americana and Beyond Games?
Move quicker to pivot the product.
Okay.
I think you talk about some of the difficulties specific to the transition period were, is this going to work? You know, how do we get this out there and kind of test it? And I think people naturally, if you've come up with an idea, you want to see it through. You know, you can convince yourself a billion different ways why it will work.
Yeah.
I think being a little bit more ruthless in that early stage of this is not working in playtest. Like, we ran a test, or when we shipped that Dawn of Tanks SKU,
Yeah.
that was the end result of a lot of just real tough discussions around, like, this design doesn't have the economic depth necessary to support the customer acquisition cost and
Right.
things like that. Right. So, yeah. Learning to be more ruthless is definitely something that's been a huge takeaway for me here.
Okay.
Particular to critiquing your own product, your own baby, because it's tough. It's
Right.
tough to do that, and I think it's a necessary thing, in particular for a gaming startup.
All right. Thank you very much for your time, Aaron.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Hey everybody, I'm here with John King, and John, you are VP of Product here at Beyond Games, right?
That is correct.
And so, what does that mean? What do you do in terms of like scope of responsibility and you know, and in terms of your job function here?
Yeah, sure. I effectively have my hands in everything that's game related.
Okay.
So in our case, Battle Strike Force, our new product is out, so I deal with every component that you would see with that, from design, QA, production needs, marketing needs, working with the VP of engineering for engineering needs, anything, the heartbeat of the product.
Got it. And then in terms of the way that the team is structured, you know, from a product perspective, can you talk to me roughly about how that structure looks like for you guys?
Sure. So we have a distributed, it's not as unique now as it was a few years ago, but we have pretty much a distributed team set.
Okay.
So our house, for example, the team that we work with closely with are all our 3D assets, a fair amount of our marketing assets, and anything we need is in Joburg, Johannesburg. Sorry, we call it Joburg.
Okay.
Johannesburg, South Africa.
Okay.
We have our engineering team is actually down south in El Salvador.
Okay.
And then we have our, kind of like our directors up in Oregon, for example. We're all kind of spread out a little bit.
Okay.
Here in the San Francisco office, we're a little bit more focused on the production side of things. So I have my art producer, my PM producer, the QA lead is here, QA manager, excuse me.
Okay.
He's here, and then our design team is here.
Okay. And so do these, I assume these functions roll up into you?
That is correct.
And then,
with the exception of engineering, they roll up into Steven over there, but I do interact with them, of course.
Got it. And so it sounds like in terms of the distributed teams, you've got like basically art and engineering that's kind of distributed out. And And from your perspective, what are the advantages of having those distributed teams? Is it mainly a cost issue, or are there any other advantages? And then what are some of the challenges of working in a distributed structure?
Well, I mean, part of it is cost. It is easier for us to be able to do it like that. It also allows us to kind of get ahead of the production schedule, being able to sign things out while having people work overnight to be able to generate and produce assets for us, or be able to get bug fixes in or whatever. It makes it pretty easy for us to do that when people are operating a few hours ahead to, in Joe Berg's case, operating 11 hours ahead of us. But the challenges are like any other distributed team, your communication, making sure that there's a constant back and forth of understanding exactly what you're looking for, so you're not missing a target or missing what you were supposed to be working on, and then costing us another cycle of having to go back and reiterate, fix, or whatever it may be.
Got it. And then what does the product team kind of look like for you? Is it like how many, whether it's PMs versus producers? And then, I think the big debate in a lot of, sort of mobile free-to-play game studios is, what is the role of a producer versus a PM versus a game designer? And so for you guys, what does that look like?
So, production-wise, like I said, I have an art producer who kind of focuses that because it's an art-heavy game, a lot of 3D and stuff like that.
Yep.
And then I have a producer who also moonlights as a PM.
Okay.
So he's pretty much keeping us constantly and on focus and on track with anything task-related.
Okay.
My end, I would say, I probably act as the more traditional producer as far as generating the ideas or any sort of being able to answer any questions that kind of crop up on that end. I find it interesting in the industry as it goes, just because of the debate that you get between producer and PM, like which one do you go towards, or which one seems to lead a lot of credence. I'm a little old school, so I prefer the producer aspect of it.
So you guys are producer-driven?
Yeah, a little more producer-driven. But, try to keep understanding that project management is very important, and making sure that, our sprints are all aligned and everything's working there.
Okay.
So.
And for you, what have been the biggest challenges, whether it's from, like a product perspective, or maybe even working with the distributed team structure? What are the key challenges for you?
So the key challenge is always like I mentioned earlier, is the time. Mm-hmm. Just trying to be able to, they're winding down and we're winding up. So making sure that we can go through and approving all that. That does take some time, and it takes a little bit more time out of the earlier part of my day. Yeah. Just because it's one of those things where I now have to kind of go through the approval process early, so then I can send it out, so then I can start working on things that kind of work with our time. As far as a product, it's a huge game, and we are a small group. We're a lot smaller than even traditional mobile teams at this time. Sure. So it's kind of like there's a lot of overhead, and there's a lot of context switching where you have to be able to say, okay, we're having an art issue here. How do I handle that? And then, okay, now we have an engineering thing over here. Now I have to put on my engineering hat and try to understand what's going there. So it's a lot of just context switching.
Okay. And given how big the game is, and you could probably be working on a million different features, and so how does that look like for you guys in terms of trying to determine what to work on, what feature, what gets prioritized? Like, how do you guys manage that process for you?
So it's, some of it's KPI driven. Mm-hmm. How are we behaving right now? Where are we seeing slumps? Where are we seeing gains? Okay. And then we could extend and say, okay, well, what features would help elevate that? Sure. Also, I'm a big proponent of kind of market parity. Okay. This day and age, all games, when I started working on mobile games didn't need to launch with an event framework, for example. Mm-hmm. They would just be their core thing, people would play through it and repeat through it. Uh-huh. But now there's kind of an expectation with newer games, make sure that you have events in game. Yeah. So trying to make sure that our game, Battle Strike Force itself, actually maintains that market parity, so that we're, competitive in that sense.
Got it. And last question, how big of a fan of Sylvester Stallone are you?
So, I quote Demolition Man almost daily.
Okay.
But no, I've loved him since Rambo.
Okay.
Like literally, the original Rambo I love. I love all the other ones. Every time he shoots when he shot a Hind D helicopter out of the air with a bow and arrow with an explosive tip, I was like, okay, this is my guy. Oh yeah, big, super fan. Super fan.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for your time, John. Definitely appreciate the thoughts and insights that you've given us today.
Sure, no problem.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks.
Hi, everybody. I'm here with Steven Garcia. And Steven, you are the VP of Engineering here at Beyond Games, right?
Yes.
So what does that mean? What do you do as VP of Engineering?
A little of everything.
Okay.
Let's see. So, I guess to describe my role, I kind of have to describe the way the studio looks as well. Definitely, if you're VP of Engineering for our studio, it's going to be vastly different from the studio, any one of the game studios under EA or Activision, et cetera, et cetera. So, we're a relatively small studio.
Yeah.
But we've done a lot with what we have. So the way I'd explain it is first by explaining kind of how our engineering organization looks like. Our engineering organization is about 10 to 12 engineers, all distributed. We have one engineer here in the Bay Area. We have 2 engineers in Eugene, Oregon. We have about 8 engineers, 9 now in San Salvador, El Salvador, and a couple that we contract out through a studio called Darkwind Studios up in the Northeast.
Okay.
So with all that said, again, I say a little bit of everything because there is always going to be mentorship that's going to be happening within that distributed studio, making sure that the communication pipelines are all working as expected, making sure that code reviews get done by people who have that relative information to that feature being worked on at any one point in time, as well as jumping in code when I need to myself. I mean, there are some things especially when doing games as a service games, that you have to get right the first time if you're a small studio like ours.
Yeah.
And I definitely like to guide my guys to be able to do that if they haven't done it before. And that requires me to get in down a feature myself so I can help make sure that the feature is engineered where it needs to be. My guys are happy, we're happy, game's happy.
Okay. And in terms of this specific game, given just how big it is, and then in terms of real-time requirements and like some of the other sort of technical challenges associated with this particular game, could you talk about what some of the bigger technical challenges were, and then how you address some of those challenges?
Yeah. In a game like ours, I would say there are a ton of technical challenges, but each time we approach a technical challenge, we just approach it pragmatically. I'll give you an example. So let's see. Our game is more so models an MMO. So it's a mobile MMO.
Yeah.
You have a 500 by 500 tile space. Different players are spawned, or all sorts of players are spawned in one area at one point in time. So let's call it an area process. Right now, we've tuned the area process to hold about 30,000 people. Now, as soon as that threshold gets hit, we spawn a new area process, and then we essentially do a form of matchmaking to put players where they need to be to balance out that this one area with the second area, and then the third and the fourth and the fifth. So even just thinking about it like that, you're talking about 30,000 people communicating at any one point in time, but at the same time being able to communicate throughout the multiple areas as well. So how do you manage that type of communication? Currently, I guess before I even get into it, I would say normally when you'd approach that problem from the very beginning, you'd say, let me roll my own stack, let me do this myself. We chose to opt out of that path. Now, that ability to roll your own is always there, but we chose to work with a very good company, a very good server company. I'd actually call them a game server engine at this point, called Marigo. And Marigo, working with that team, helps us in terms of writing code specific for our game, but with the underlying power of being able to communicate across all of those areas, being able to manage those 30,000, 60,000, 90,000 people accordingly. So I say all that, I say we're working with this company, Marigo, is because they empower us to be able to write that code. Okay, if I were to answer this question on the client side, again, I could say I could roll my own stack, but it's very well known that It's very well known that good game engines like Unity exist. So we use Unity, and that's the same reason, that's the same way that we would choose to use this stack called Marigo as well.
Okay.
So we manage complexity, we don't bite off more than we can chew, but again, everything is pragmatic. So to go a little bit deeper, when we're talking about player-to-player communication or managing multiple players per area, every request is sent to the player. The player manages that request and communicates to the area only when it needs to. The area is never actually stalling and waiting for any one player at any one point in time. And any kind of communication where we need one source of truth, that's where the area will become a bottleneck when we're talking about 30,000 people asking for one specific thing. Every single time we design a feature that requires a source of truth, we design it so that source of truth can be malleable. And we never punish the players when that malleability comes into question. Every feature is designed like that.
Right. And then in terms of like how you've kind of structured your engineering team, could you talk a little bit about, for example, are they full stack, or are they, do you have client versus server side? And just my experience having worked on a game called King of Avalon, where we had kind of that separation, and then in different geographies too originally, which we changed later. But then that led to a lot of delays and things like that. So maybe you could talk about some of the the way that you've structured your team and kind of some of the thinking that went into structuring it in the way that you guys have.
Okay. Let's see. Where do I start? So I would say for the most part, this engineering team started with that San Salvador team.
Okay.
So that team at that time was 8 people. So they're all individuals over there, and they all have their own wants and needs, and they all want to learn X, Y, and Z. And it was communicated to me when I started working them that they all eventually wanted to be full stack engineers.
Okay.
So I started I actually started engineering back in 2005, 2006.
Okay.
And the equivalent of full stack back then was a generalist. And being a generalist even back then, when we were talking about essentially just client games, client-only games, was really difficult. That was the hardest path. That was the advice I was given back then. Okay. So to be a full stack engineer nowadays, when I hear that word being tossed around, that is easily, at minimum, doubling the complexity of being a generalist. So to hear they all wanted to be full stack, you could take that in a couple different ways. But the way I took it was that they all excelled at one specific thing, but they all wanted to excel at everything. So every feature for the past 2.5 years, 3 years, has been essentially that work has been distributed to the engineering team in a way where not only they can learn new things that they want to learn, because those new things, originally we started out with 2 server engineers, now we have about 4.5 server engineers. Okay. Now that's still spread across the same amount of people on this team, but over periods of time we had them work on server tasks with confidence, with oversight, with TDDs being implemented by their leads or by myself. So when they're actually writing the code, they know who to ask, they know what to do, and then they build on those ideas, then it just keeps reiterating after that. That ability to grow, I would say not every team has that ability to grow, but that's in all of the individuals at the studio. Yeah. And I told them from the get-go, I said, I'm coming in here with this level of experience. This is obviously my position. I'm obviously your boss, but it doesn't necessarily mean I'm always right. You can always feel free to challenge me, and then we'll talk about the best solution, because there are some things that, even with their eyes on something that's 6 to 8 months, they may be able to have an idea, bring it up,
right.
Let's talk about it.
Right.
So that's how we've been moving since.
Okay. And then in your time working on this game, just thinking back in terms of like all of the challenges that you faced, could you maybe talk about one of the biggest challenges or decisions you've had to make, and like going back, would you do things differently, or or how maybe you can let us know how things played out?
Can you ask that question a little bit differently? Sorry, just maybe it'll give us more time to think about it.
Yeah, so the question is just thinking back in terms of, your experience working on this game, kind of leading engineering, in terms of like maybe the biggest challenge that you faced from an engineering perspective, or maybe it's a decision, the hardest decision you've had to make. Could you talk a little bit more about what that was, or whether it's a challenge or a decision, and provide us some context in terms of how you kind of addressed it and how it kind of wound up?
I'm on the cusp of giving you a reply, but I feel like it's going to be a non-answer. Are you cool with that?
All right, let's take the
Okay.
non-answer.
So, I mean, if you ask me, are there any specific regrets I have with this engineering team and the way we've grown, what we've built? I'm going to say no. I have no regrets.
Great.
That said, there are some things that we're constantly improving upon, constantly fixing. And I'll recall something that happened about 6 months to a year ago. And this team has been cranking away at this game for such a long time. So
Yeah.
fatigue is always something that I'm thinking about. In terms of team fatigue, velocity,
Sure.
et cetera, et cetera. But, there was this, once upon a time, there came to be a reply that I took very seriously then, I take it very seriously now, which is, it almost always works. So it's good enough. That right there is really the death that's really the death of an engineering studio. It almost always works. Or my favorite, when I hear this from non-engineers, which is, it's a fluke.
Yeah.
There's no such thing as a fluke. Code is code. Code is pragmatic. Code operates. Yes, sure, there's asynchronous behavior and there's anomalies, but code is code. Everything that happens is intentional.
Right.
In so many, if you think about it in so many ways. So it's more over teaching that over a long period of time and helping people to understand that almost perfect is not perfect. And when we're talking about almost perfect, let's say I give you the benefit of the doubt, almost perfect's 2%. So 2% of users run into a threading issue. Okay, well, what's 2% of a million? What's 2% of 5 million?
Right.
And then you start to think about the level of experience, like you're talking about providing 2% of a million experiences,
Right.
and that makes you think twice. It's something that's kind of difficult because we all have a certain level of ego, and at some point in time we want to say that is good enough. But, and this is kind of something else that we established over time, is this ability to develop kind of with this egoless mentality. And we're always working on that. We're always correcting that. But first tearing down that it's good enough, I think it's there, that was the first step.
And maybe I can ask you the flip side of that question, which is, what do you guys think you have done extremely well?
I would say being able to continuously optimize our process and our workflow.
Okay.
Being able to be happy. I tell my guys this all the time. If at the end of implementing a feature, if you're not satisfied with it, then I'm not satisfied with it. So the ability to take something and implement it to spec in a way that you're satisfied with a majority of the time is always the goal. Nobody likes to no engineer likes to implement a feature and then realize at the end of a 2-week cycle that everything they did was wrong.
Okay.
So that's my job, to be able to give them the ability to know what to expect at the end of the day and to be happy with their result. I just want to continue that. I'd like for us to continue that. That's the best feeling.
All right. And then in terms of any trends or changes you're seeing in the industry from, whether it's a technology engineering perspective or otherwise, can you talk about what you're seeing right now?
When you ask me trends, you're talking about like in engineering, in mobile engineering, just in the mobile space?
Yeah,
like
I
San
mean,
Francisco?
maybe what you're seeing from an engineering perspective, like, certainly there's, for example, a lot of games now are becoming real-time multiplayer. Are we therefore seeing some changes from a technology stack perspective, or even if there's some interesting trend you see outside of engineering, it'd be great to hear your perspective on that.
Sure. So coming into the games industry in 2005, that was still when console was king.
Yeah.
Then jumping into it, so I used to work in the past. I got my first mobile experience at this company called Edgimoco and
Yeah.
DNA, and they provided me with a lot of good knowledge there. But that being said, if I take a look at the engineers, specifically game engineers that are around from 2005, there's less than a handful of them. If I look at the engineers that worked in that mobile space, which some of them came from the console space, there's less of those people as well, especially when it comes to engineers. So what I see right now is the spot in which, from a product point of view, from a mobile product point of view, the expectation on mobile products is so high.
Right.
It's not only it's not only the next best thing that you can do, but it's this next best thing plus everything that last year's games did. And it's
Right.
that year after year after year. So when I talk about the loss of talent overall in the industry, just because of churn, and I look at the expectations of the product, those two don't sit nicely together. So what I think about is being able to identify that engineer with that experience, even back from those console days or even back in the early mobile days, and making sure that you continue to respect that churn, that velocity, to be able to manage them to a point where at the end of the day, maybe 2 years from now, they're not only happy, but they're able to say, I want to keep doing this because it's manageable.
Right.
It's a manageable lifestyle, so to speak. And I know engineers, I wouldn't say engineers have it the worst, but I'd say some of the times engineers tend to have it the worst.
Depends on who you talk to. Whoever you talk to, they got it the worst.
Yeah, everybody, yeah, you're right. Absolutely correct on that. But being able to manage that.
Yeah.
So, for example, I told you we're a very distributed team,
Right.
and it's very easy, I've seen, for distributed teams for other companies I've worked in the past, to not only get off to very bad starts, but have very bad endings. And a lot of it's due to time. And a lot of it's due to the communication gaps. Communication gaps create more crunch at the end of the product cycle, being unsure about what you're building. Clearing all that away, making sure all of those pre-production problems and those production problems are solved and taken care of. And then at the end of the day, knowing which guys are giving it, that they're all basically committing themselves to, let's say, a 90% velocity or 95% velocity, which is it's just extremely hard to do that for more than a month sustainably. Being able to manage that and say, guys, you specifically, you have to take a vacation. You have to go take a break. You have to take a day off. But that ensures that at the end of the day, they may be happy with the fact that I told them to take a day off, but they're going to come in maybe next week or the week after that feeling a little bit more refreshed, and that's what I'm after. It's that sustainability.
Okay, got it. And Stephen, I just have one last question for you. But it sounds like you've been in the mobile game industry for a while. It sounds like you started off at NG Moco. But in your experience through the various companies you've been with and your experience here at Beyond, what do you think it takes to be kind of successful in mobile free-to-play? Just given how competitive this industry is.
In general or as an engineer?
Both.
I mentioned this word earlier in this conversation which is egoless.
Yeah.
It's so very important to approach every conversation with the egoless mentality. That's going to keep you in. That's going to keep your team happy. That's going to keep the product happy. Anytime you hear of an argument or of a misunderstanding, if two people hold their ground, at the end of the day, not only do they as individuals pay for it, but the product pays for it, the studio pays for it. So to make sure to curb our ego at any one point in time for me, is one of the most important parts of the whole thing. Secondly, I'd say the ability to want to grow and learn. As an engineer, it's very easy to fall into this trap where you feel like you know enough. Right. You never know enough. I still don't know enough. I'll never know enough. No engineer will ever know enough about this space to say confidently, I'm 100% right every time. Being able to take that into it, being able to teach that mentality, that helps keep us fresh. You can't, from like a managerial perspective or even as a team member perspective, you can't do anything with the mentality. You can't do anything. You can't really almost achieve anything to a certain extent with the mentality of, it's good enough, I know enough. That's never, that mentality is never enough. So those two things. And I know it sounds very simple or very...
The simple stuff are the hard things, right?
Yeah, it sounds very simple, but it's all about just keeping and maintaining that mentality.
Right.
And that actually, though it sounds simple, is difficult.
Yeah. All right, great. Well, thank you very much for your time, Stephen.
No problem. Thank you.
All right.